And greetings and welcome to Knowledge for Life. And today we're going to be joined by Mr. Herbert Addison Burns. He's an educational consultant dedicated to youth empowerment through character development programs, with the central focus on unraveling the root causes of racial disparity based on the teachings of Carter G. Woodson. We just wanted to pay respects to the great Neely Fuller Jr., who passed away on February the 1st, 2025. Brother Neely Fuller said that if you don't understand white supremacy, everything else will confuse you. So let's take a listen to a little bit of what Neely Fuller had to say about white supremacy.
And now, Mr. Neely Fuller.
How it works. Confuse you. There is some activity. And more. If you do not understand white supremacy, which is racism, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. Only confuse you. Only confuse you.
Now let me go ahead and bring our brother on. And greetings, Brother Herbert.
Oh, greetings, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor. I'm really looking forward to bringing forth knowledge from the late Carter G. Woodson about self and also true education versus miseducation.
And so I went into a little bit of your background. Can you, before we go any further, tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I'm born and raised from Cleveland, Ohio, and I came from a strong AME background. On my mother's side, my grandfather started Community AME Church. He started really two. He started the Community AME Church, now is located on 55th and Lexington in the downtown Cleveland area, and also the Allen Temple. And back in those days, Stephen, coming up, we were really, we had a regimented routine every Sunday. We had to go to Sunday school and then main service. And every Sunday was like a Thanksgiving day. We just had a big dinner for all of us. It just wasn't the immediate family. It was cousins, uncles, and so forth. And then later on, fast forwarding, went to Ohio State University, where I graduated. Well, I didn't graduate, but I stayed there for 2 years and then transferred over to Kent State University because it was a smaller environment. And that's really at Kent State University. That's where I got a lot of my knowledge and instruction on Black history. And that was from the late Edward Crosby. The late Dr. Edward Crosby was really responsible for transforming Negro History Week, which was started by the Honorable Carter G. Woodson. But Dr. Edward Crosby transformed it into Black History Month, and he did that with the help of the Black United Students at Kent State University. So from there, I spent most of my life in education. I taught social studies, but I had the opportunity also, and I saw the need to incorporate character development within our youth because I work primarily with urban youth in Northeast Ohio, adult education, general education development, and also English as a second language. And I also had the opportunity to give those presentations, manhood character development, to community-based organizations located in New York City. So from there, Stephen, I taught for 2 years at Tri-C Community College. I taught the history of Ohio's Underground Railroad and also the history of the slave Bible. The slave Bible was an instrument that was rewritten by British missionaries to give the Negro population, the Negro slave population in the West Indies, the misimpression that God ordained and sanctioned slavery, and that was their fate. So
Mm.
I also took upon it myself prior to that time for 5 years to research that material. So now, just bringing everything up to date, I'm involved in character development for community-based organizations and also character development for faith-based businesses on how these businesses can operate their business and conduct their business on a daily basis according to Scripture, the Holy Bible.
Right, right. And I think that, in today's political climate, this show is right on point, because it's because of the miseducation that we find ourselves in the position that we find ourselves into today as a people. Would you agree?
Yeah, yes, I would, and it's very interesting that now we are just have entered Black History Month, and it's kind of ironic because uh, during the past few years, uh, Black History Month, the way it's been presented, has added to the miseducation of our people, and what I mean by that is that it's far removed from the local geographical area and the benefits that Black people, and particularly the youth, what we're receiving, the benefits from society, from the early freedom fighters and the early trailblazers here, that's not being exposed. And that's a neglected scholarship. And I have
Mm.
had an opportunity to speak with quite a few high school students about the way Black History Month has been presented, and they're really disappointed because it's the same generic figures year after year after year. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, and that's not to discredit them, and that's
Right.
not to give honor to especially to Martin Luther King because he did give his life to the movement.
Mm.
But uh, Operation Breadbasket and those freedom fighters in the South, they didn't have any influence, they didn't have any input into the social reform movements that we had here in Northeast Ohio. We had our own set of problems, and it took different strategies to actually overcome the problems and the racial turmoil that we had here, um, really started in Ohio all the way back, dating from the early 19th century and then leading up to the late 60s.
So we're going to get into a little bit, but I first wanted to, since we are basing a lot of our conversation around Carter G. Woodson, I'm just going to give the viewing audience a little bit of history of Carter G. Woodson, and if you would like, you could definitely fill in. So Carter G. Woodson was born uh, December the 19th in 1875. Think about this now when we talk about the miseducation of the Negro, which is a book that is still relevant today, that he was born in 1875 and he passed in April the 3rd of 1950. He influenced African American history. He was an author. He was a journalist. He is often referred to as the father of Black history. Woodson
Mm-hmm.
was the second Black American to receive a doctorate from Harvard University following W.E.B. Du Bois.
Mm-hmm.
He founded the Association for the Study of African American Life and History
Mm-hmm.
in 1915 and launched Negro History Week in
Mm-hmm.
1926, which later evolved into Black History Month. The month that we are in now is primarily accredited to Carter G. Woodson. One of Woodson's most notable works that we're talking about today, The Miseducation of the Negro, was published in 1933.
Mm-hmm.
In this book, Woodson argues that Blacks were being culturally indoctrinated rather than educated in American schools. He believed that this condition led to Black people to become dependent and seek inferior places in society. Woodson urged his readers to become self educators and to do for themselves, regardless of what they were taught. And is there anything that you would like to add to that, brother?
Yes, one of the most notable educational components of the miseducation of the Negroes that you pointed out very well, Stephen, is that to do for both. And also we have what Dr. Naeem Akbar basically will support that is the level of competence, meaning that every group has achieved its own high level of knowledge and has offered benefits to society. And that's really one of the main focuses of Carter G. Woodson. Because even now, even though that book was published back in 1933, we're still suffering from the legacy of the miseducation of the Negro for a lot of different reasons. And one of the reasons is also because the removal of our self-identity. So
Mm,
when we focus on our cultural history, that brings us back into who we are and our identity. But on the other hand, right now, what I'm saying is also, again, getting back to Dr. Naeem Akbar when he talks about the level of competence and the true identity, we're also being bombarded with an alien identity because although
mm,
we're right into the beginning of Black History Month. Pretty soon, we'll be entering in a few weeks President's Day, and
mm-hmm,
unfortunately, our kids are still taught to have reverence towards an alien identity. For
mm,
those leaders that our children are taught to have a high level of respect for, to have a high level of reverence for, like Thomas Jefferson, who was not only a slave owner, but after Ohio came into the statehood, he wanted Ohio to be a slave state.
mm,
And in his diary, he also stated that Black people were mentally and physically inferior.
mm,
Also went on to state that Black people physically, we release waste material from our skin, not our
mm,
skin, which means we all have, according to him in his diary, we have this disagreeable order.
mm.
In other words, we just naturally smell bad.
Right.
And if we
And this
talk
is the same Thomas Jefferson, right, that was sleeping with our sister. Um, what was her name?
Sally
Sally
Hemings, Sally
Sally
Hemings,
Hemings.
Sally Hemings, yes, yes. And also, if we go back to George Washington, now, although he did free his slaves, but it was due to a dream he had one night. He thought he was going to die. The next morning, he told his wife, look, I think I'm going to die. I'm going to make out a will to free our slaves and also provide them with education. But prior to that point, he actually approved the first fugitive slave law, the first one. There were two. He approved the first one and actually broke the law to capture his wife's slave, and that was on a judge. He actually basically dodged authority. He didn't go through the legal channels of actually capturing his slave back then. He actually violated the own law that he approved. So these are the people that our children right now are, that we should have reverence for. And if we go back to Carter G. Woodson mentions David Walker. David Walker was a revolutionary back during the time of George Washington. And he also had a very revolutionary newspaper that was circulated. And David Walker actually emphasizes in his book that every Black family should have Thomas Jefferson's diary. Every Black family.
And why would he emphasize that?
He emphasized that because this would counteract basically the subliminal thought messages that our children are receiving in school. And they may not think about it, but it's a subliminal thought message. In Carter G. Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro, he said that our children are basically being taught mentally that they're inferior. So even think about it, President's Day is just a time they don't have to go to school, but it's a mental suggestion that they're giving to have a high regard and reference for these political leaders and these officers.
Right.
So right now, today, and I've actually have experienced this in some of our schools, I don't know about in Dayton, but some of the schools, particularly on the elementary school level, they have what are called behavioral sheets. And what I'm seeing, these behavioral sheets are given to Black students, and their behavior has to be monitored to every class they go to. But what it really is, Stephen, it's a paper trail. So later on down the road, if a child gets hit with a crime, the criminal court system is going to go all the way back, and they're going to use that as a paper trail to use that information against them. And not only that, it's a thought that's being influenced in our children's mind. You're a bad kid. You're always going to get in trouble. We have to monitor your behavior. And it's no coincidence that what I have seen and witnessed, Black children were practically the only ones who had this behavioral sheet.
Yeah. And so there's a lot to pull out from what you just talked about. So one of the things, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Racial Justice Now, that Sister Zakia, who is a good friend of mine, who founded that organization, that she does a lot of social, if you will, warfare against the miseducation system. And also to give a shout out to Dr. Umar for also, addressing some of these issues that you just spoke about. Now, I know that Dr. Naeem Akbar, he did a powerful book. I think it was called Chains and Images of Psychological Slavery. I believe that was the name of the book. And also Dr. Amos Wilson, who talked about as a people, we are possessed, he said, we're possessed with an alien mind, right? And this alien mind is what we're talking about today. If you want, talk a little bit about this alien mind. How does it shape how we perceive reality? How does it shape how we act and function in this society?
Well, basically what it does is it clouds our judgment. And going back to what Carter G. Woodson said, is that the events today are determined by what has happened in the past. So anytime that we are removed from our cultural history and our heritage, then we don't have any conception of who we are, and we're basically lost in this society, and we become consumed by the alien identity for those who are taught in our school system, who have achieved, these other groups who have achieved these great feats and provided knowledge in our society. But also what the alien mind does, it
Right.
basically it shuts out all the achievements of the true achievements. And I'm talking about from a local geographical perspective of what our recent ancestors and our earlier freedom trailblazers have achieved. For instance, we're taught Thomas Edison. Thomas
Hmm.
Edison, of course, is invented the light bulb. But on the other hand, I'm pretty sure most students aren't aware of Granville Woods,
Hmm.
Columbus, Ohio. Granville Woods basically worked for the Southeastern Dayton Railroad Company, and he came up with the inductor telegraph.
Mm.
And Alexander Graham Bell bought that, who was responsible for actually manufacturing and inventing the telephone. And then
Mhm.
Granville Woods invented what was called the multiplex telegraph system, which basically was a system and an electrical apparatus that involved the voice to travel through line wires so trains would not collide and it would avoid train accidents. So
Mm.
now, because of his invention in Ohio, I believe it's almost maybe a third of our food is brought in by train. So if it was
Mhm.
Granville Woods, you know, that would we really wouldn't have that delivery system to deliver food to our national chain distribution centers.
Mhm.
Alien mind, what the alien mind does is it basically blocks off any achievements that we are now receiving in today in our modern conveniences in society. And that's what it does.
Mhm.
And it promotes low self-esteem.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
And so that alien, that alien mind that we talk about and how we perceive reality, there's a term in psychology called learned helplessness, where I'll give an example. So they use the tethered elephant as an example of learned helplessness. So when an elephant is born, what they do is they tether that baby elephant to with a rope. And as it begins to grow and it tries to pull on that rope to escape, as it grows, it begins to just be conditioned to understand that when it feels that resistance, that's when it's time to stop. You can no longer go any further. But as a grown elephant, we all know that that elephant could easily, you know uproot that rope tied to whatever is locking it into the ground. But because it has been conditioned from a young age, it doesn't go any further. And so this learned helplessness that we see amongst our people when it comes down to doing for self. I know that the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, he said, hurry, black man, and do for self. He said, because you will be outside of the factory gates looking in, and it'll be a
Mm.
sign stating that it's closed. And that's paraphrasing, but
Mm.
here we are today in a situation under the Trump administration where the only solution for our survival is to, as the most honorable Elijah Muhammad said, to pull our resources and do for self. Um, would you like to comment and go a little bit further into that as far as that mentality is concerned?
Yes, and I think, Steve, it goes back to when we're talking about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and also Booker T. Washington and Marcus Garvey
Mm-hmm.
and the do for self concept. And when we look at the do for self concept, and I remember years ago, I had an opportunity to listen to um, a presentation that was given by Minister Louis Farrakhan. And at that time, I had no knowledge of the Willie Lynch theory, and I had an opportunity
Mm.
to look into the principles. And what I found that was really fascinating out of the 15 principles that Willie Lynch had manufactured, the first one was to remove the black person or the black man in particular from his image of God. If you
Mm.
think about that, that's the power base right there. Our relationship with God is our power base. So we can't talk about doing for self if we don't have a relationship with the Most High.
Right.
You know, we just can't. But getting back to developing those resources, they are vital. They are crucial right now um, to our success and to our survival, because we have no one else really to depend on. And it's been that way for a long time. The Honorable Elijah
Mhm.
Marcus Garvey, in particular, and Booker T. Washington, they have basically been making this outcry for a long time. And see, when we talk about Carter G. Woodson, this was one of his critical remarks. Not only was he actually pointing the finger, so to speak, because even in the miseducation of the Negro, he said this is not a broadside against any particular racial group, but he was also really critical about the Black man doing for self, not only
Mhm.
educational programs, with healthcare, with transportation, with businesses, and so on and so on and so on. And this is one of the things that we need to do as a race of people. Because, and I believe Dr. Omar brought this out, you know, I believe, I can't remember what the figure is, but way over $1 trillion. You know, we are the richest group of Black people in the whole planet. You know,
Mm.
well, there's really no reason why we cannot self-sustain ourselves without the help of outside groups.
So I know that student minister Nuri Muhammad, one of the things that he talked about is that we are between the ninth and 11th richest nation on the earth. And when you think about it, that means that we're above 9 other nations that have their own school systems, have their own hospital system, have their own educational system, have, their own trade and commerce, so forth and so on. And so when we think about being the ninth richest nation and being in this impoverished condition that we're in, then there's nothing wrong with the money that we bring in, but there's something wrong with our mentality that we have as a people. So, what is the meaning of unraveling the root causes of racial disparity?
Well, Carter G. Woodson was very uh, critical um, about the root causes of racial disparity, and he also pointed at education. Education is one of the key factors, and basically he stated that what needs to be done is we have to take matters into our own hands with our cultural history. Uh,
Hmm.
if we just look at some examples, like right here in Ohio, um, John Mercer Langston, who was the first Black attorney and the first public official in the state of Ohio, and what's really miraculous about him is that the doors for him to actually gain a legal degree were closed, and he actually had to study to get that on his own. If back as him, if we look back at, there's another man by the name of Jacob Gaskins, who was a slave, but
Hmm.
traveled to Canton, Ohio, and created his own fortune. Um, if we just look at some of these early trailblazers, if we look at their history, then that would not only give us an incentive, but it will give us a roadmap on what we should and can do.
Right.
Because again, the events of today have been dictated in the past. And if we look at Booker T. Washington in a place like Alabama, he was the first one to actually manufacture bricks with no straw.
Mm.
White folks were dependent on him. So, and getting back to Dr. Naeem Akbar, because some of us may not be in a position where we can be entrepreneurs, but we should have our own resources and to do something that's really unique, that the employer is dependent on us as much as we are dependent on him. So therefore,
Mm.
we're not disposable. We should always be in a position Where we have resources that are unique, and we're the only one that can offer that, so that it's an equal. Our relationship is based on equilibrium. There's a balance there, and that's the
Hmm.
really need to come to terms with. Because most of us, when we do apply for a job, we're just thinking that, well, we should perform our job, go home, and leave. And then again, we have this party mentality. There's nothing wrong with being relaxed and being, and being comfortable and having some entertainment. But when it gets to the point, where it basically damages our progress, and this is one of the things that we have to think about with the hip hop culture. You know,
Right.
because this is one of the cultures that has really, out of all the billions of dollars that they have produced, what have they actually done for our society?
Mm.
What kind of benefit have they actually produced for our society? So
Hmm.
it just always, and the things that we have now, our forefathers basically sacrificed. They did that. And when I going back to John Mercer Langston, he was more responsible for the educational reform movement than any other black man in Ohio. He actually brought in 7,000 students, and that was back in the mid 1900s. So therefore, he did that so future generations can have an education. And we have to have long-term thinking. We have to just stop thinking about ourselves. And this
Right.
is the problem, we're short-term thinkers. We're not long-term thinkers, you know, and,
Hmm.
and this life moves really quick. It really
Yeah, it
does.
does.
It really does.
And,
So therefore,
mhm.
we have to start thinking about not only our children, but our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. We have to do that and put forth some things to them, because also, I don't know if you're familiar with this, here in Cleveland, when I was coming up, when I was young, we had an all-black hospital,
Mm.
city hospital, but it no longer exists. But
Mhm.
it was one of the founding fathers was a minister, and his
Mm.
name was Wade McKinney from Antioch Baptist Church, and he was one of the founding fathers of Forest City Hospital. And this is one of the critical remarks that Carter G. Woodson had. He was very critical about ministers because they did not transform their ministry into community involvement. And
Mhm.
I believe we're still here today. Not only,
Right.
not only that was a very critical view of Carter G. Woodson, but Booker T as well.
Hmm.
He had a very
Absolutely.
he had a very critical eye towards ministers because of that and their illiteracy. They are really commissioned to provide spiritual nourishment and moral principles to our community and our society. We can talk about all the money in the world, but if we don't have any type of moral foundation and we don't know how to harness that money and those resources, and we don't know how to channel them directly and properly, it's going to be a waste. So
Right.
therefore, the ministry is the bedrock of our community, and they aren't doing that. They aren't.
Hmm. And
Basically.
and we could, yeah,
Yeah,
we
go
can
ahead.
definitely go into the preachers because when we look back in the day, the preachers were at one point in time the leaders of our community. They established a lot of things, due to the contributions of the congregation. They were able to, like you said, we were able to build our own towns, and we had our own schools. As we know, Black Wall Street had its own bus line. I mean, its own, and so much more. And a lot of these things were just erased from history. Like you were saying, we had our own banks, we had our own schools, we had a number of things. And throughout time, the evil of this system of white supremacy destroyed a lot of these institutions. I remember I heard a program today that talked about how coming out of slavery, the white man was actually dependent on us. We were the blacksmith. We were the ones that he would come to build certain things, right? And slowly but surely, through wicked machinations, that he was able to reverse that, and where he became the one with the skilled trades, and he denied us, that knowledge of those things. So it's not like we were always in this position that we're in today with this mentality that we have today, but because, as you're stating so eloquently, that this miseducation system has dumbed us down to the degree to where we are actually so dependent on the slave master, so dependent on our open enemy, that our very lives are in danger, I would say, at a critical point in our history.
Mm, mm, Yeah, that's awfully true. And talking about a critical point, Carter G. Woodson was very critical about the quote unquote black middle class,
Hmm.
because he felt that the black middle class offered little to nothing for the uplift of, or what he called, or what they called back then, the Negro race. And that's something that we cannot overlook.
Mm.
You have to basically be critical of those who just want to hold on to this every man for himself attitude. And a lot of
Hmm.
it started during affirmative action during the mid to, I would say, late 80s, when corporate America opened up its doors. But corporate America did that primarily to the black female. And the black female basically, for the most part, took on this attitude of independence, which is okay to a point. But when
Hmm.
you break off the ties with your mate and say that, well, hey, I have this wonderful job and a house and a car and so forth, and I'm economically self-sufficient, what do I really need you for? For what?
Right.
And not only that, even though I know that I had some critical remarks about the hip hop culture, but in a way, I can understand how it was born, because their attitude was, well, look, the baby boomer generation just left us out in the cold. You guys got a good job, so therefore we have to go for what we know. Now,
Right.
I'm not an advocate of selling drugs at all, or any type of criminal activity at all. However, I understand the need for a child who's born in an urban environment and there's hardly any way out. Okay, so
Right.
there, that led to the expression of a lot of what we call hip hop music today. So therefore, getting
Hmm.
to Woodson, he was very critical about the so-called professional Negro, who just basically use their education only to sustain their career, their job, but did nothing to use that to plug in and provide some type of uplift and economic progress for the Black community.
And
And
I
and
want
and,
to interject. Oh, go ahead.
and even the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, you can't blame
Hmm.
white people for all your problems.
Hmm.
So we have
Hmm.
to be critical about our own race and the things that we're doing that are hindering our own economic progress as well.
Yeah. And he pointed out three classes of Black people that are really, hindering us from moving forward. He did point out the preacher,
Mhm,
like you said. He also pointed out the Black politician, and he
mhm,
pointed out the Black intellectual.
mhm,
So when we when we look at these classes, I mean, you've already broken down the Black preacher. One of the things that in doing some research on the Black preacher, I found out that Black preachers were, by the slave master, told to teach four things. Number one, turn the other cheek. Number
mhm,
two, love your enemy.
mhm,
Number three,
mhm,
pray for those who despitefully use you. And number four, you'll get your heaven after you die.
mhm.
And so those same preachings we see going on today.
if when they say that, well, you should forgive your enemy and you should turn the other cheek, that's giving this false notion that we should allow people to abuse us. And that also means verbal abuse as well, because we talked about psychological abuse,
Right.
because black people, basically, that's how slavery has been perpetuated for 400 some odd years through psychological manipulation.
Hmm.
So therefore, there's no way that we should allow that, and we should basically take on safeguards to counteract that. But it's up to the ministers basically to provide these remedies, and it's in the Bible and it's in the Quran.
Right. I mean, what would you say about Black History Month? Do you think that we are really maximizing this time of Black History Month?
I think that every Black organization, whether it's a school or community organization, should focus on locally. I had a conversation with a historian in my area about 4 years ago, and
Hmm.
I said, well, why is it that Black historical professors do not focus on their local history in their own backyard? And her response was because of notoriety. When they concentrate on national Black history, it's more notable. So it really triggers something off of my mind that, well, what are you in this for? Are you
Mm.
in for to provide quality education for the up and coming scholars? Or are you just concerned about your ego, yourself?
Right.
That was the question. But getting back to directly answering your question, unfortunately, Stephen, I think we're really far removed from the way Black history really should be presented. First and foremost, I haven't really seen, I would say maybe one out of all the Black history programs that I have seen, only one that has mentioned Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson,
Mm.
you and I know, is a founding father of Black history. Okay. And
Hmm.
Dr. Edward Crosby, who was the director of the Pan African Studies Department at Kent State University, who transformed Black History Week into Black History Month. Those two names aren't mentioned. I went to a presentation last year and it was awful. And it's the same generic, watered down presentation that's given year after year after year. It's Martin Luther King, it's Rosa Parks, and so on and so on.
Right.
And Martin Luther King had no direct involvement. I really can't speak for Dayton, Ohio, but I know for a fact he had no direct involvement in the social reform movement in Cleveland, Ohio, just mentioning segregation.
Hmm.
So horrible here in the early and late 60s, really from the late 50s up to the mid 60s, that there was a mass movement at that time of Black students, of Black families, and the school system was not prepared for it. So those kids basically were put in basements, they were
Mm.
attics, they were put in gymnasiums. Um, they weren't allowed to actually see the nurse. So
Hmm.
parents said, we want to bust our children. And it wasn't an issue of going to school with white children. It was an issue of equal accommodations.
Right.
Children basically can have the same type of quality education as any other child. And during that,
Hmm.
the superintendent, his name was Ralph McAllister, he was racist. He basically said that Black children were not on the same intellectual level as white children. They were morons. That's all Black children. So
Hmm.
that particular time, there was an independent group, and these parents got together, and they actually picketed the Cleveland school system. At that time, it was called the Relay Parents. They changed their name to the Hazardale Parents Association, and there were two incidents. The first one was in Collinwood, and those people came out. They called our children all kind of horrible names. They came out with dogs. They spit on them, and then
Mm.
The second one was in Little Italy at Memorial Junior High School.
Mm-hmm.
1,400 people came out with guns, knives, bricks. Two people from the the Calling Post newspaper were injured, had to go to the hospital. All right. But then there was another movement that came to support the Hazelden Parents Association, and that was the United Freedom Movement. Now, this was really notable. And really, if anyone looks at history, they'll really think about this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're not going to send our kids, we're not going to worry about busing our children to these white schools on the west side. We are going to construct our own schools. And they took out these vacant buildings. They sent black children there. And the focus of the curriculum was Afrocentric history. And the
Right.
children loved it. And they got certificates. I think that really should have kept that. They should have kept that going.
Absolutely.
And this
I know
goes
that.
back to Carter G. Woodson's theory. The events from today are determined by what happened in the past. So therefore,
Mm-hmm.
let's get back to Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, at the time, Carl Stokes was the mayor. He was one of the first, if not the first, black mayor in the whole country. Martin Luther King wanted to come to Cleveland. Carl Stokes did not want him to come here because he was conducting a juggling act between getting the white vote on the west side and the black vote on the east side. Martin Luther King, he came here anyway. He came here with Abernathy and Shuttleworth. The reason why he came here was to generate bail money for Operation Breadbasket. And another reason why he came here, because most of the black citizens in Cleveland at that time had migrated from Alabama. So he gained support and sympathy from black people here, because most of them came from Alabama.
And let me please hold that thought. But I just
Yeah.
wanted to talk about the reason why they migrated. This great migration, as people can read about in history, was due to the fact that down in the South there were so many lynchings. And I think that people should, if they get a chance, read about the history of our beautiful sister Ida B. Wells. But go right on ahead with that, brother. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I mentioned my grandfather, and that was his motivating factor from coming to Cleveland. The Klan chased him up here. He was from County, South Carolina. So I'll just leave that there. That was just a tidbit of information. But getting back to Martin Luther King, they came here at St. Paul's Church on Coventry and Fairmont, and also Corey Baptist Church and Malcolm came here too. And after they collected that money, they went right back down to Alabama. So Martin Luther King had no input in the social reform movement here in Cleveland, Ohio. And this is one of the important events that our youth need to know about. They need to understand that. And the reason why they have an education and they're allowed to go to public schools was because of the United Freedom Movement and because of the Hazelden Parents Association. Martin Luther King had nothing to do with it whatsoever. And this is one of my pet peeves against the way Black History Month is being presented. You know, they're beating this Martin Luther King drum, but here in the Midwest, it took different strategies to overcome social reform, not only with education, with police brutality, with corporate racism, and all these racial social barriers. It took not only a different independent parents association, but it took Carl B. Stokes, who transformed City Hall into Black political power.
And I want to say too, you know, when we do get anything of Martin Luther King, we get this watered down Martin Luther King. I have a dream, Martin Luther King. And as we all know, you know, when you're dreaming, you're asleep, and sleep is synonymous to death. So, you know, what they don't want to focus on or concentrate on is the latter years of Martin Luther King. What really had Martin Luther King not only in the scope of the United States government, but even as you were saying, some of our own black misleadership turned their backs on Martin Luther King. But like you were saying, there are so many unsung heroes in the black community, in black history. I mean, our black history is so rich that they always show you like an iceberg and you only see that which is sticking out of the water, but they say that there's so much more underneath the water, and we haven't as a people even touched on, in all actuality, the real richness of our black history. And I'm not talking about black history of us building pyramids or Timbuktu or uh, 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 that type of black history. I'm just talking about our black history for where we have had to overcome insurmountable odds, and we did it. And they buried our history, they stole our inventions, and they assassinated our leaders and burned down our towns. And this is why they're so afraid of what's that, CRT, critical race theory. And like you said, this is why they're afraid of black independent schools. Just a little bit of history: the most honorable Elijah Muhammad and some of the believers in the Nation of Islam, when they tried to establish a black independent school, they were jailed for doing that. And you would think that the white man would be happy to not integrate the schools. But in truth, it was the white man who wanted to integrate the schools so that he could, as the old saying goes, as far as the art of war, is to keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. What would you say about our culture when it comes down to the importance of rites of passage?
Well, that gets back to the whole manhood, or developing the manhood character. And
Hmm.
it also gets back to what the Holy Bible says about manhood, and it also goes back to what the Quran says. And in order to counteract these material thoughts that are given to our young males in society, we have to constantly reinforce it.
Mm.
One-time shot is not going to do it. It has to be constantly reinforced, not only by our spiritual guides in the church and in the masjids, but also by the parents. We have to take responsibility. And this goes back to the teachings of Carter G. Woodson. He says we have to take responsibility. And again, in the whole beginning, this introduction and the miseducation of the Negro, he said that this is not a broadside against any particular race or culture, you know? So getting back to answer your question about uh, the character of manhood, the problem has really mushroomed to the point again where it's caused violence against our sisters. It's caused psychological trauma. You talked about that before, not only on the physical side of rape, but on the psychological side of rape. Because even though there are families who have not been actually physically raped or physically abused, I know of families right now that their father, who is supposed to be the spiritual leader of the household, who has inflicted so much psychological damage,
Mm.
it's going to take years for them to get over it. Now, I'm happy to say that these people who I know, they don't actually have any type of hatred towards other people, but it's going to take time. It takes time to heal these wounds. And,
Absolutely.
it gets back to the fact that our males, and I know males who have reached the stage of 50, 60 years old, and they have
Yeah.
no concept of what a man truly is. They really don't.
Hmm.
They're on a materialistic level, or now because we have free gun laws, they're free to carry a gun. And it's so
Hmm.
easy for anyone now to step into an argument, to argue with their wife, to chastise their children, even though they might be grown. And they're inflicting so much psychological damage to the point where it could be irreparable.
Hmm.
It really could. And then it's hard for the family to actually have a normal life, to socially interact with their friends, with their family, you know, and it gets back to the whole root cause of our males truly don't understand the whole spiritual definition of what a man is, and it is defined by God. And he sent that prophets, and again, the ministers are the ones who are commissioned to do this, and they aren't doing that. Every
Yeah.
minister, every minister in the church should have some type of class or some type of sermon every week or every month, basically to go over what God says and how God defines what a man truly is and the ingredients needed to develop manhood.
We did a program uh, under Knowledge for Life, a number of conferences or forums where we focused on what was called generational trauma. Generational trauma. And what we found out was, after 4 generations, what the behavior that comes out of trauma becomes normalized, right? And that we don't even at a certain point of time even recognize that it is a behavior that has come out of trauma. And one of those behaviors is that domestic violence. And there's so many other different behaviors that we see going on in the street where our young people, they don't even recognize it as being abnormal behavior because it has been normalized, and now we even call it black culture. You know what I mean? So it's something that we definitely need to take a look at. And you take that generational trauma and you combine that with the social engineering that is taking place by the white institutions controlling the rap or music industry, where you can't even hear about a love song today. It's always ratchet and raunchy. And this is what these industries propagate so that they can keep our people at a certain state of mindset in our community. Your thoughts on that?
Well, with the whole hip hop industry, I really haven't did too much research or study on that. Uh,
Hmm.
but there are isolated cases that I have heard of, and this is just God reaching into the hearts of some of these young men. A friend of mine I used to work at the library told me that a young man who he knows was offered a sizable record deal. They flew him to Ohio, they flew him to California, and after he heard some samples, he just said, "I'm not doing it. I'm I'm not doing it." And when I hear about cases like that, and I was just reading in the book of Jeremiah where it says that the law of Moses is no longer written on a table of stone. I'm going to write it in your heart.
Mm.
So some of us can recognize the laws, statutes, and commandments that are now in our innermost being, in our heart. So we have that criteria. We have the criteria to know instinctively what's right and what's wrong, even though we're being infiltrated um, by negative and destructive outward forces.
Hmm.
Me
Hmm.
personally, I'm just going to continue to pray, and any young man or any young lady that is on that plane, I'm going to help them out as much as I can, because God has
Absolutely.
reached into their life.
So as we begin to wrap this up, and I really appreciate your time, and I hope I'm not keeping you too long. We just have a few more questions, and then we'll begin to wrap it up.
Okay.
What are the solutions for miseducation in the school system?
Well, I think foremost and frontmost is a spiritual mission. The spiritual mission, we have to recognize that um, and guide our young people to know that they do have a spiritual mission. We need
Hmm.
counselors who can actually find out what each individual's purpose is in life, Of course, everyone is going to school for a vocational career, but they're just not an economic animal. They're just not put on this earth just to make a living. Yeah, that's part of it. But also they have something to offer to themselves. They have a relationship with the Most High, and they have a duty to provide some type of quality and contribution to our community, so we can
Right.
continue to thrive. We can continue to flourish as a community and as a whole. We're just not individuals. We are a community, and I believe that's a solution. The other is also, as I said before, is getting back to the ministries, getting back to the churches. These ministers should come to grips with, they have to come into the knowledge of character development, and also going out in the community. They got to get out that pulpit and translate their sermon into the community. It has to materialize, and they had to provide type of instruction for character development, manhood development, because right now we're at a crisis, and that is the heart of our problem right there. Because spiritual nourishment, moral principles, those are the bedrock. That's the solution, but also that's the problem, and that's lacking. So that's what
Mm.
needs to be done.
Yes, sir. And I guess the last question is, what do you want young people to take from listening to this conversation?
Particularly those young people, and I know this is, you want to reach out nationally, but particularly for those young people who are living in Ohio and also throughout the Midwest, that there are um, trailblazers who came before you that made your education possible. Right now, although we are living in some very troubling times, but I look back at my parent, my mom, who's still alive, and I thank God. She lived through the Depression, you know,
Mm.
and they didn't even know they were poor. She had 12 other brothers and sisters. They didn't know that there were times when they didn't have much to eat, and they were actually sleeping on pillows that were potato cases, you know.
Hmm.
They're not living like that right now, even though these times are troubling. But I mean, come on, you got expensive tennis shoes and sportswear and gear. But the reason why I'm saying this is because there were people who actually sacrificed, who came before you to make all these things possible. Study those people. Study those people, and actually you could look at their life and look at what they did and use that as an example to move forward. Because you're going to be more than just a basketball or a football player. You're more than that. You could become an engineer, oceanographer, a government official, a director of a well-established community organization. You have other talents, you have your mind. And also what I want you to understand is that expand your vocabulary too, because right now, most of the school systems, they have terminated the dictionary. You're not going to be able to expand your vocabulary and have a wide range of words at your disposal from the internet. You're going to need a dictionary. And that's how you can actually navigate your way through this society. But foremost and frontmost, find out who you are. Get into your Bible, get into your Quran, find out what your spiritual nature is, because you are a spiritual being and you have a relationship with the Most High. Establish that relationship, because that's your power base.
All right. All right. Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Herbert Burns, an educator, educational consultant. How can people get in touch with you? Are there any, if you could give them, maybe if you have some social media, website, books, let people know how they can contact you.
Sure, they can email me at Herbert Burns, the number 7, at yahoo.com. I have 3 audiobooks right now available on Google Play and audiobooksnow.com, and they're all on the history of the Underground Railroad in Ohio. And I do offer a character development program and also a manhood development program that's available for individuals and also community organizations. But for those people who are interested, feel free to email me, and I have a very extensive web page on LinkedIn, and that gives you a lot of information. And also, I offer community-based educational programs and character-based programs for faith-based businesses who want to operate and conduct their business according to Holy Scripture. So you can email me, and I'll be more than happy to get back with you within a 24-hour period and give you all the information that you need and answer all your questions.
Right. Thank you, brother. Thank you. If you could hold tight, I'm just going to end this on out, and I'll speak to you here in a second.
Okay.
And so, thank you, brothers and sisters, for tuning in to Knowledge for Life. Please come back every week for a new program, and like, share, and follow. Your support of Knowledge for Life just helps us to, of course, produce more programs, community conscious programs like this. And there's nothing more important in today's time than our health and wellness. I'd also like for you to look into our book, Immunity Empowerment, a holistic guide to Black health. If you're just learning about the importance of maintaining your health, and you should know that your health is your wealth, especially in today. There are a number of different viruses that are emerging, um, diseases that are running rampant. They even have a superbug. All of these things is the reason why it's so important for you to maintain your health. And the thing about your health that you'll learn in this book, Immunity Empowerment, is that it's not just about eating right. It's also about maintaining a healthy and peaceful state of mind.
That's
And
right.
your relationships that you have can disturb and cause stress and lower your immune system. You need to learn how to go within yourself, whether you want to call that prayer or meditation, so that you can find some peace within. You also, in the book, it does talk about music and how vibrational rates can either disturb your peace or they can calm you down and relax you. There was an experiment with some plants where they put uh, d- certain type of music in front of it and calm music in front of another, and the music that was radical, if you will, killed the plant. So these are very important things that we must know in this day and time, because as we are under so much stress and we're eating improperly, this causes us to leave this earth at an early age. So check out that book, Immunity Empowerment. And with that, I want to thank you all for watching. May God continue to bless you and your family with the light of truth. God bless.
Are you ready to take control of your health and empower your immune system? Introducing Immunity Empowerment, a comprehensive guide to understanding and enhancing your immune system. For those looking for a holistic method to boost the immune system, Immunity Empowerment is the book for you. Learn how your immune system functions and discover the key to its strength and resilience. From the shadows of slavery to the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, explore the pre-existing conditions that have disproportionately affected the Black community, such as diabetes, hypertension, and obesity. Western medicine often takes a compartmentalized approach, where sometimes the cure can seem worse than the disease. Uncover the implications of Western medications and why they come with side effects. But hope is not lost. Meet the nutritional superheroes, foods, herbs, and vitamins like vitamin C, zinc, garlic, and antioxidants that can supercharge your immune system. Discover the science of fasting and its profound health benefits when done mindfully and safely. Breathing properly, such as diaphragmatic breathing, can have positive effects on your immune system and overall health. Never underestimate the power of a good night's rest. Sleep is crucial for your overall health and immune system. Understand the life-saving power of breastfeeding and its benefits for both mothers and children. Be aware of depopulation and immunity weakening culprits. Learn about the foods that negatively affect your immune system. Sugar, the greatest drug on earth. Discover how it undermines your immune system. The mind-body connection is powerful. Positive thinking can boost your immunity, while negative thoughts can weaken it. Enhance your physical and mental resilience with regular physical activities like walking or yoga, and mental exercises like mindfulness and stress reduction. Never underestimate the power of prayer. It profoundly impacts your well-being by connecting mind, body, and spirit. Healthy relationships are key. Find resources aimed at improving health within the Black community. Escape media madness. Learn how media shapes young minds and how to protect them from harmful images and messages. Explore the impact of alpha waves and mood music on your health and well-being. Cultivate abundance by building your home garden for self-sufficiency and improved well-being. Discover alternative forms of building and maintaining health. Empower your immune system today. Get your copy of Immunity Empowerment and start your journey to better health. Available now, get the softback at Amazon or the ebook with hot links to references and resources at Amazon, Gumroad, and Patreon.